North Carolina is renowned for its serene evenings, and this one was no exception. The house was already enveloped in nighttime silence, with only the distant chirping of crickets and the soft rustle of the wind outside the window. I, Sarah, was curled up on my favorite old couch in the living room, savoring the long-awaited quiet. It had been a tough day. Work, calls, endless tasks that seemed to have no end. But amidst all this chaos, there was one constant joy: my son, Liam. Liam came into my life 8 years ago when I decided I was ready to give a home to a child who had lost theirs. He was a quiet, reserved boy with sorrowful eyes, but over the years, I watched him slowly open up. Now, at 18, he had grown into an independent, reliable, and kind young man. I was proud of him, though I knew he still carried pain he never showed. I was about to head upstairs to bed when I heard the soft creak of my bedroom door. Standing in the doorway was Liam, wearing his old t-shirt with the logo of the local baseball team. His hair was tousled, and his eyes glimmered in the dim light of the nightstand lamp. "Mom?" His voice was just a notch above a whisper. I was surprised. He rarely came to me this late. I stood up from the couch and motioned for him to come in. "What's wrong, Liam? Are you okay?" I asked, trying not to let my concern show. He shrugged and looked down, as if struggling to say something important. I can't sleep," he admitted, a bit sheepishly. His words were simple, but I knew they carried more weight than mere insomnia. Liam wasn't the type to complain or seek attention without reason. "Sit down," I said, patting the edge of the couch. He sat, slouching slightly, his long legs crossed in front of him. I noticed him nervously fiddling with the hem of his shirt, a habit that always appeared when he felt vulnerable. "Did something happen?" I asked gently, not rushing him. He sighed, running a hand through his dark hair, and finally looked at me. His eyes were filled with a sea of emotions. "Mom, have you ever thought about what you might have done differently?" His voice was quiet but carried a weight, as though this question had been haunting him for a long time. My heart ached. I had no idea he had been carrying this pain. But I didn't rush to answer. Instead, I gave him space to continue. "Sometimes I think that if I'd been different, better, maybe my real parents wouldn't have left me," he said at last, his voice trembling. His words tore me apart. How could he think that? I had always seen him as strong and capable, but at that moment, I realized just how heavy a burden he bore. "Liam, listen to me," I said firmly, placing a hand on his shoulder. "You were never not good enough. You have always been the best thing that's ever happened to me. What your biological parents did has nothing to do with you. That was their choice, their mistake. And you, Liam, are my son, and I'm so proud of you." He didn't respond immediately, but I saw his shoulders relax slightly. We sat in silence, listening to the sounds of the night outside. Then, hesitantly, he hugged me. In that embrace, I felt everything: his pain, his gratitude, and most importantly, his trust. At that moment, I realized this night wasn't just about sleeplessness. It was a step toward bringing us closer together, toward healing old wounds and moving forward. The next evening, the weather in North Carolina took a sudden turn. The sky was overcast and rain drummed against the windows, turning the house into a cozy refuge. Liam was sitting at the kitchen table, methodically jotting notes in his physics notebook. His hair fell slightly over his forehead, and his focused expression revealed his determination to distract himself from the previous night's conversation. But I knew he hadn't let go of the weight he carried. I stood by the stove, stirring the sauce for pasta, trying to act natural, though my thoughts swirled. Liam's words about feeling not good enough still echoed painfully in my mind. I was determined to show him that he wasn't just a part of my life, he was its very center. "Hey," I said, glancing at him over my shoulder. "How about a break? I made your favorite cheesy pasta." He looked up, a small smile playing on his lips. In that smile, I caught a glimmer of hope that perhaps he had started to release his worries. "Yeah, thanks, Mom," he replied, closing his notebook. His voice was warm but still a little weary. We sat at the table. The sound of rain against the windows and the creaks of the old radiator filled the room with a cozy atmosphere. I noticed how Liam absent-mindedly twisted his fork in his hands, clearly deep in thought. "You know you can always talk to me, right?" I asked gently, careful not to sound too probing. He looked at me, his brown eyes softer than usual. "I know, Mom," he said. "It's just, sometimes I don't know how to put what I feel into words." I nodded, letting the silence between us linger. It wasn't a heavy silence, but one filled with understanding. Liam continued, his voice quieter this time. You've always been the one who saw me better than I saw myself. It's strange. I know I have a family, but sometimes I still feel lost. That's normal, Liam, I said, placing my hand over his. We all feel lost sometimes. But that doesn't make you weak or wrong. It makes you human. He nodded, giving me a faint smile. But there was something in his eyes that told me he wanted to say more. After dinner, we moved to the living room. Sitting by the fireplace, Liam suddenly asked, Mom, do you ever regret adopting me? The question caught me off guard. I quickly turned to him, feeling my heart tighten. Never, I said firmly. It was the best decision of my life. You changed everything, Liam. The silence between us deepened. The rain outside grew heavier, its rhythmic tapping against the glass filling the space. Liam moved closer to me, his eyes full of tenderness and vulnerability, something he rarely showed. Thank you for never giving up on me, he said, placing his hand on mine. I felt warmth spread through me, but in that moment, it wasn't just maternal love. It was something deeper, something I couldn't quite name. He leaned in quickly and kissed my cheek. The gesture was both shy and heartfelt. I smiled, trying to focus on his gratitude rather than the confusing feelings stirring deep within me. Always, Liam, I replied, determined to remain composed, even as emotions swirled within me. The storm outside began to calm, but inside me, a very different storm was starting to brew. When the weather in North Carolina clears after a storm, the night is special, the fresh air smells of damp grass, and the stars shine against the inky black sky so brightly you feel you could reach out and touch them. That night, Liam and I decided to step out into the backyard. I brought an old blanket, and he carried 2 mugs of hot cocoa he had made himself. It was his new hobby, learning to make something special and delicious. We sat on a wooden bench under the starry sky, wrapped in one blanket. The backyard was enveloped in silence, broken only by the chirping of crickets. Liam stayed quiet for a long time, gazing at the twinkling constellations. I was curious about what he was thinking but didn't want to disturb his peace. Mom, have you ever been afraid of making the wrong choice? He asked suddenly, turning to look at me. His question caught me off guard. I lowered my gaze to the mug in my hands, considering my answer. Of course, I finally said. Every time I had to make an important decision, I doubted myself. But, Liam, the most important thing I've learned is that doubt is normal. It just shows that you care. He nodded, but his eyes remained thoughtful. And were you ever afraid that adopting me was the wrong choice? His voice was softer now, almost a whisper. I turned to him, placing my hand on his shoulder. Liam, no. Never. You weren't just the right choice, you were the only choice. I could be afraid of everything else, but never that. His face softened slightly, but I could see something still troubled him. It's just, he began, looking up at the stars. Sometimes I think that if you'd chosen someone else, maybe things would have been easier for you. Without all my issues. My heart ached. I placed my hand over his, feeling how tense it was. You are not an issue, Liam. You are a part of me. And I would choose you again and again, no matter how many chances I had. He turned to me, and in his eyes, I saw a mix of emotions, gratitude, fear, love. It was hard to describe everything that passed between us in that moment. Do you really mean that? He asked quietly. Liam, I don't just think it. I know it, I said, squeezing his hand. He leaned closer to me, and I felt his lips brush against my cheek. It was a gentle, warm gesture that made my heart race more than it should have. I smiled slightly, trying to keep my emotions in check as they threatened to overwhelm me. Thank you, Mom, he whispered, lowering his gaze as if embarrassed by his boldness. Anytime, Liam. You can always count on me, I replied, keeping my tone steady, though inside, a whirlwind of feelings raged. The night, so clear and calm, seemed to pause around us. For the first time in a long while, I felt there was something between us that went beyond words. It was a bond that couldn't be broken, but it made me wonder how far we were willing to go. Soft golden sunlight filtered through the curtains, filling the room with a warm glow. I woke up with an unusual sense of calm. Typically, mornings began with rushing around, tackling endless to-do lists, and feeling like there was never enough time. But today felt different. The stillness in the house wasn't oppressive but comforting, as if the world itself was urging us to slow down. In the kitchen, I found Liam standing by the stove, making pancakes, a surprising and delightful sight. His hair was slightly messy, and a rare smile graced his face, one he usually kept hidden. Everything about him in that moment reminded me how much he had grown, strong, caring, and resilient over the years. "Good morning," I said as I walked to the table. "Morning, Mom. I thought today should be your turn to relax," he replied without turning his head. I detected a trace of pride in his voice. We sat down to eat together, and I noticed how at ease he seemed. The conversations we had shared over the past few nights appeared to have lifted some of the weight from his shoulders. But I also knew this wasn't the end, it was just the beginning. "Liam, you look different today," I said, breaking the silence. "It's like a weight has been lifted." He nodded, swallowing a bite of pancake. "I think it has. Talking to you helped me realize that I'm not alone. It means a lot." I smiled, feeling a warmth spread through me. "I'll always be here, Liam. You know that, right?" "I do now," he said. Then, he looked at me in a way he never had before. His eyes were serious but not heavy. "Mom, you don't have to feel alone either." That question caught me off guard. I glanced down at my coffee cup, considering my response. "Sometimes I do feel that way," I admitted. "But when you're around, everything feels lighter." Liam reached out and took my hand. His touch was firm yet comforting. He smiled, and in that smile, there was something new, awareness, confidence, and a deep understanding. "Then promise me we'll face everything together. No matter what." "I promise," I said, feeling a wave of relief wash over me. After breakfast, we went out for a walk. The sky was clear, the air crisp, and for the first time in what felt like forever, life seemed to make sense again. Liam walked beside me, his stride confident, his expression peaceful. He wasn't the lost boy I had met 8 years ago. He was a young man now, strong and caring, but still holding on to the tenderness that made him so unique. When we returned home, Liam stopped at the front door and turned to me. "Mom," he began, his tone slightly hesitant. "You're everything to me. Thank you for never giving up." I hugged him, feeling his warmth and strength. "I could never give up, Liam. You're my son. And you'll always be my choice." That day marked the start of a new chapter for both of us. We no longer feared the past, no longer felt lost. Together, we looked toward the future, knowing we had what mattered most, each other.